Naomi looked like freedom. Airports, hotels, names that blurred into nights. She had lived the kind of life people secretly envy, spontaneous, confident, untethered. But beneath the laughter and the lipstick, there was a truth she never said out loud. 50 lovers, zero fulfillment. Not once had her body answered back. She had built a myth around herself that liberation meant saying yes, that power was measured in how easily she could walk away. But somewhere between the sheets and the silence after, she began to feel something colder, a quiet hollowness she couldn't name. In every encounter, she gave more than she felt. Every moan rehearsed, every touch performed, a fluent language of connection without intimacy. What others called adventure, her body called exile. Sometimes in the mirror, she'd wonder, is this freedom or another kind of obedience? The question haunted her on red-eye flights and in unfamiliar beds. She didn't know it yet, but the real rebellion would not come from another night out. It would come from stopping, from listening, from choosing slowness over performance, presence over noise. Because the body always keeps count of the times it was ignored. And one night, when exhaustion finally met honesty, Naomi's own body would speak back for the first time. Not through desire, through truth. And everything she thought she knew about freedom would begin to unravel. What if the most radical form of liberation was learning to receive? By 38, Naomi's life was a montage of motion. Early flights, late dinners, hotel beds that smelled of bleach and perfume. She was a consultant for a global firm, high pressure, high reward, always moving. In photographs, she appeared radiant. Sharp suit, easy smile, glass of wine raised toward the camera. People called her fearless. Some called her enviable. None of them knew how carefully she had built the illusion. Her independence had become her armor. After her parents' divorce, she learned early that control was safety. Her teenage years were spent proving she didn't need anyone. Her 20s were a catalog of experiences, a rebellion against dependence, against stillness, against vulnerability. Every yes to a stranger was a no to the fear of being left again. The first encounters had felt exciting, even defiant. There was power in choosing, in being the one who decided when to stay, when to go. But as the years blurred, the thrill dulled. The names changed, but the rhythm stayed the same. Conversation, attraction, a night that promised connection but always ended in distance. She started keeping a mental list of excuses. He was tired. It just didn't click. Some people are built differently. The lie worked for a while, until it didn't. Because in the quiet after sex, when her partners drifted into sleep, Naomi would stare at the ceiling, heart still searching for something her body never received. Her mind would replay each touch, trying to find the moment she'd gone missing. Once, she caught herself pretending to climax just to make it end faster. It wasn't even about pleasure anymore. It was about control, about not having to face the disappointment of being unseen. She smiled at him afterward, said, "That was nice," then went to the bathroom and cried without sound. Over time, even the crying stopped. The numbness grew heavier than shame. To her colleagues, Naomi was unshakable. To herself, she was a quiet contradiction. A woman fluent in performance, but illiterate in intimacy. The distance between who she seemed to be and who she was kept stretching until it felt like two separate lives. When her best friend got engaged, Naomi clapped, toasted, smiled. Later that night, she sat alone in her apartment, scrolling through photos, wondering if there was something broken inside her. The thought scared her, not because it felt untrue, but because it felt inevitable. Her body had become a stranger she managed, not a home she lived in. She could talk about pleasure in abstract terms, chemistry, attraction, compatibility, but she had no map to her own sensations. That realization arrived slowly, disguised as fatigue. During a conference in Berlin, she woke up one morning unable to get out of bed, not from sickness, but from emptiness. Her limbs felt heavy, her mind fogged. For the first time, she canceled her meetings and stayed in her room. Lying there, she noticed how even her breathing felt shallow, mechanical. It struck her. She had spent years exploring the world and never once explored herself. The thought embarrassed her. Then it frightened her. Because what if her body wasn't broken? What if it was waiting? She didn't have the answer yet, but a small part of her, the part that still believed in second chances, was ready to start asking the right questions. That same week in a hotel elevator, a stranger complimented her perfume. She smiled politely, said thank you, and for the first time in years, didn't feel the urge to turn the moment into anything else. Something was shifting, quietly, but unmistakably. Naomi just didn't know that the next person who would change her life wasn't the lover, but herself. The first time Naomi admitted her truth out loud, it slipped out by accident. It was a Tuesday night, 2 glasses of wine into a casual dinner with a colleague named Clara. Older, calm, married for years. The kind of woman who seemed anchored, soft without apology. Their conversation drifted from work deadlines to relationships, then, unexpectedly, to pleasure. Clara laughed about aging, about learning to slow down and actually listen to her body. Naomi smiled, pretending to relate, but her throat tightened. Something inside her wanted to be seen, and for once, it refused to stay silent. She lowered her voice. "Can I tell you something weird?" Clara nodded. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "I've never actually felt it. Not once. Not with anyone." The words hung in the air like a confession in church. Kara didn't flinch. She simply asked, "And by it, you mean pleasure?" Naomi nodded, cheeks burning. Clara leaned back, eyes gentle. "You'd be surprised how many women say the same. The difference is, most of them never say it out loud." That sentence broke something open. The shame that had lived like a parasite in Naomi's chest loosened its grip. For years, she treated silence as protection, but in that moment, honesty felt like oxygen. Later, walking home, she replayed the conversation in her head. Kara hadn't offered solutions, only presence. She had said, "Your body isn't your enemy. It's just waiting for you to stop abandoning it." The phrase followed Naomi like a melody she couldn't unhear. She thought back to the dozens of encounters that had defined her 20s and 30s, the nights filled with attention, but never intimacy. The way her body tensed every time someone's hand lingered too long, as if pleasure were something she needed to earn or survive. In therapy, later that month, she told her counselor, "I don't even know what I like. I only know what makes others happy." The therapist didn't interrupt. She just said softly, "Then maybe that's where we start. Not with what you like, but with how you feel when you stop pretending." Naomi tried the exercise that evening. She dimmed the lights in her apartment, put her phone away, and sat on the edge of her bed. The silence was unbearable. Her first instinct was to distract herself. Music, scrolling, a drink, anything but stillness. But she stayed. She noticed her breath, shallow, restless, trapped in her chest. Her hands felt foreign on her own body, like she was touching someone she didn't trust. For years, touch had been a transaction, proof of desirability, not connection. Now, alone, it felt like an apology. She whispered out loud, as if to convince herself, it's okay to feel nothing. And at first, she didn't. Just numbness. Then something quieter. An ache that wasn't physical, but emotional. The ache of absence. That night, Naomi didn't force anything. She just breathed, learning the rhythm of her own lungs again. Her therapist had said, before you can feel pleasure, you must feel safety. And for the first time, she understood what that meant. Safety was not in another person's hands. It was in her own permission to be slow, clumsy, imperfect. The next morning, she woke up disoriented, but lighter. The mirror reflected the same face, but the eyes looked less guarded. She made coffee, stood by the window, and realized something small but profound. For the first time in her adult life, she had spent an evening with herself without performing. That was the beginning of her undoing, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself with fireworks, but with breath. Because healing doesn't always arrive through ecstasy. Sometimes it begins in the exact moment you stop pretending that numbness is normal. Naomi didn't know it yet, but her confession, those 7 trembling words, had already changed the trajectory of her life. I've never felt it, not once, not with anyone. She thought it was a sentence about lack. It was actually the first sentence of her freedom. Naomi didn't plan to change. She only wanted to understand. But the more she tried to understand, the less she could return to pretending. Once you've seen your own silence, it's impossible to unhear it. Her therapist, Mara, suggested something simple, journaling after every date or intimate moment, not about what happened, but about how her body reacted. Write in sensations, not sentences, she said. Tension, warmth. Contraction, drift. The body speaks in texture. The first few pages were empty. Naomi wrote, dinner fine, felt nothing. A week later, he was kind, too fast. I disappeared halfway through. Slowly, the emptiness on paper began to reveal a pattern. She wasn't broken, she was braced. Mara explained it gently. When the body doesn't trust the moment, it freezes. That freeze feels like numbness. But it's really protection. Naomi stared at her hands. So, I've been protecting myself from pleasure? From overwhelm, Mara said. The body doesn't separate the two. Both are intensity. Both require safety first. The idea unsettled her. For years, she'd worn emotional armor disguised as independence. Now, that armor felt heavy, like she'd been dragging steel across her skin every time she said yes without desire. She began declining dates, not out of bitterness, but curiosity. What would it feel like to stop auditioning for affection? At first, loneliness surged like a tide. Friday nights stretched long and quiet. She almost texted her ex, the safe choice, the familiar one, but didn't. Instead, she poured herself tea, turned off the lights, and practiced Mara's breathing exercise. 4 counts in, 6 counts out. Name the sensation. Let it move. Some nights, her body answered with nothing. Other nights, she felt small flickers, heat behind her ribs, a hum in her throat. Not pleasure exactly, but presence. That's when she found the video, a talk about embodied living, led by a woman who spoke about energy, consent, and the intelligence of the body. One line stopped Naomi mid-scroll. Your body has never failed you. It's been waiting for you to arrive." Something inside her cracked. She signed up for an online workshop that same night. It wasn't sexual, not even close. The class began with breathwork, sound release, grounding and sensation. But as she lay on her mat, eyes closed, something unexpected happened. With every exhale, her mind loosened its grip. Memories surfaced. Moments she'd laughed through discomfort, smiled through disconnect, performed confidence instead of truth. Her shoulders trembled. The instructor said, "If emotion comes, let it." Tears came, uninvited but honest. They rolled into her hair as her breath deepened. The shaking wasn't fear, it was thaw. After the session, Naomi sat in stillness, drenched in sweat and relief. For the first time, she'd felt movement inside her that wasn't anxiety or desire. It was release. She wrote in her journal, "The body remembers everything, even the nights I pretended not to care." That week, she began noticing small rebellions. She wore looser clothes, slept without setting an alarm, ate slowly. These weren't indulgences, they were trust exercises. But with awareness came grief. She began mourning all the times she traded connection for validation, touch for proof, pleasure for performance. She realized how many men she'd let in without ever letting herself be present. One night, while folding laundry, she found an old Polaroid. Her at 26, laughing on a beach in Barcelona, arm around a man she barely remembered. The smile looked genuine, but she could see it now, the distance in her eyes, the practiced sparkle of someone performing freedom instead of living it. She placed the photo back in the drawer and whispered, "I forgive you." The forgiveness didn't erase the past, it retranslated it. Each experience, once labeled mistake, now became data, proof of what happens when a woman learns to live disconnected from her own rhythm. Mara once said, "Healing isn't about becoming new. It's about remembering who you were before you forgot to listen." Naomi began to understand. She noticed how often she'd used humor to escape vulnerability, how often she'd said, "I'm fine," when she was starving for tenderness. She noticed that she flinched when someone offered genuine care, not because it felt wrong, but because it felt unfamiliar. One afternoon, during a session, Mara asked, "When was the last time you felt safe in someone's presence?" Naomi couldn't answer. The question sat between them like a mirror. Mara smiled softly. "Then let's start by making that someone you." That night, Naomi lit a candle, turned off every device, and sat on her floor in silence. The air was thick with memory and fear. She placed a hand over her heart, then her abdomen. Her pulse was uneven, but it was there, hers. She whispered, "I'm here." And something in her body, tired, patient, wise, seemed to whisper back. It wasn't peace yet, but it was contact. And in a world that had taught her to rush, to prove, to perform, that contact was nothing short of revolutionary. It happened on a night Naomi didn't plan for, a Tuesday with dishes drying on the rack and rain tracing clean lines on the glass. She wasn't sad, she wasn't euphoric, she was simply out of reasons to delay the life she wanted to inhabit. She brewed tea, left the phone in another room, and sat on the floor with her back against the bed. No playlist, no script, just the sound of water in the pipes. The air felt dense, like a theater before the lights go down. Mara's last message hovered. Go where your yes is smallest. Naomi closed her eyes and asked the question gently. Where do I feel welcome? Her right palm lifted before her mind decided. It landed over her heart. Warmth. The body's first sign of safety, not desire, though both might one day meet. 4 slow inhales, 6 longer exhales, shoulders unlocking by degrees. When old images pressed in, She named them history and let them pass. Naming turned storms into weather. A second yes appeared lower, less a spark than a weight, steady and honest. She placed her other hand on her abdomen. Breath expanded into both palms, a tide finding shore. She did not chase sensation, she listened for it. Her mind, trained to measure, asked for proof. Is this anything? She answered with a line from the workshop. Right now is enough. The sentence changed the room, turning performance into presence, effort into attention. Tears came first, salts, breath, soft trembling. Tears and pleasure live in the same nervous system, sometimes one clear space for the other. No drama, just thaw. Then a sequence so ordinary she almost missed it. Exhale lengthening, jaw unclenching, belly softening. A new tempo. She stayed counting breaths, not seconds, until the space between thoughts widened and quiet gained texture. For years, she had treated her body like a stage. Tonight, it felt like a room with the lamp finally on. Consent with self, she whispered. I ask, I wait, I stop when the answer changes. Simple, ceremonial, merciful. Time thinned. Naomi followed sensation the way one follows a shoreline in fog, near enough to hear it, far enough to respect it. When a wave of warmth rolls and scattered, she didn't correct it. She thanked it for visiting. She saw how she had mislabeled freedom. It wasn't saying yes easily. It was saying yes accurately. It was the power to pause without apology. A subtle surge gathered under her palms, not fireworks or a cliff, more like dusk deciding to become night. Breath deepened on its own, as if someone internal had opened a window. She didn't move faster. She didn't move at all. She stayed. And in that stillness, her body crossed the threshold invisible from the outside. Alignment, bones, breath, belief, settling into the same sentence. Release came as warmth, spreading outward in patient circles, then returning to center like a bird that knows the way home. She didn't perform it, she witnessed it. When the wave faded, what remained was not emptiness, but ease. She lay back on the rug and watched the ceiling blur into shadow, smiling at the quiet miracle. Later, she wrote a single line. I stopped auditioning for love and started listening for consent. She thought of years confusing speed with power. She thought of women counting their worth in encounters, mistaking endurance for liberation. She wanted to tell them, the body always asks before it gives. Muscles unlearn faster than memory. Safety rewires faster than fear. The kettle clicked, the rain eased. Naomi rinsed her cup and glanced at her phone without touching it. No notification outweighed the message she had received from within. She turned off the lamp and let the dark be gentle. In the hallway mirror, her face looked the same and entirely different, familiar and finally inhabited. This wasn't the end of loneliness or wanting. It was the end of leaving herself. And that, she realized, was the beginning of everything else. The morning after felt like a soft reset. No revelation, no thunderclap, just quiet coherence. Naomi woke early without the familiar dread. The city outside was still half asleep, washed in silver light, and for the first time in years, she didn't reach for her phone. She stayed still, listening to her own breath as if it were a language she was finally fluent in. There was no rush to label what had happened the night before. It wasn't a breakthrough or an awakening. It was recognition. The sense that her body had stopped guarding the door and allowed her back inside. The heaviness she once mistook for calm was gone. What replaced it wasn't excitement, but steadiness. She moved through the morning deliberately. The shower felt different, the water warmer, her skin less foreign. Every act, dressing, eating, walking, carried a new tenderness, as though her body were something to collaborate with, not control. In therapy, she told Mara, "I didn't try to feel anything. I just stayed." Mara smiled. That's all the body ever wanted, to be met, not managed. Naomi nodded, tears gathering without shame this time. They weren't from sadness, they were proof of re-entry. Days turned into small rituals. She began to greet herself at the mirror each morning, not with critique, but acknowledgement. Her journal filled with fragments of sensation instead of analysis. Softness behind ribs, breath that expands instead of collapses. Work changed too. She noticed how she used to armor herself with efficiency. Now she paused between tasks, stretched her hands, let silence refill her. Her colleagues said she seemed lighter, though no one could name why. One evening, a man she dated months earlier texted, asking to meet. Old Naomi would have said yes automatically, mistaking attention for connection. This time, she paused, checked in with her body, and felt the answer rise clear and calm. Not yet. She typed back, "I'm not available right now," and felt no guilt. That single boundary felt larger than any grand transformation. Naomi began sharing her reflections in a small online journal under a pseudonym. She wrote not about orgasm or failure, but about the process of returning to one's own rhythm. One line resonated with hundreds of strangers. "I thought my body was broken. It was only waiting for my respect." That sentence became her compass. By her 39th birthday, she no longer chased meaning through intensity. She found it in quiet moments, the hum of her breath before sleep, the warmth in her palms when gratitude passed through. The woman who once collected nights like trophies now collected stillness like truth. And in that stillness, she discovered the kind of freedom she had been chasing across countries, faces, and years. The freedom of finally belonging to herself. Naomi learned that healing rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive as applause or revelation. It creeps in quietly, disguised as gentleness. The first proof of her transformation was not pleasure, but patience. She stopped rushing her own process. She stopped calling stillness failure. Looking back, she saw the map of her old life with startling clarity. The constant performing, the smiling through disconnection, the belief that intimacy depended on someone else's approval. What she once called empowerment had been exhaustion. What she once labeled desire had been obligation. Now, she understood something the younger version of herself could never have grasped, that the body and the soul learn safety at the same pace, and that pleasure without presence is only noise. Mara's words echoed often. Healing isn't about fixing what's wrong, it's about remembering what's true. Naomi began to live that remembering daily. When a surge of self-doubt appeared, she breathed into it instead of fighting it. When pain resurfaced, she didn't analyze, she listened. There were no more checklists, No more self-improvement plans. Her milestones became moments of honesty, catching herself before self-betrayal, choosing silence over performance, saying no with kindness. She often thought about the women she used to meet in airports and conference halls, those who wore confidence like armor and loneliness like perfume. She wanted to tell them, the body does not forget the truth. It only waits for your permission to tell it. Naomi realized that what she had found wasn't just sensual liberation, it was spiritual literacy. To inhabit her body again was to pray without words, to honor the sacred in the ordinary. She wrote one final note in her journal that summed up the journey. The deepest pleasure is peace. The most profound touch is presence. And the most honest love begins when I stop abandoning myself. With that, she closed the notebook. The story she once lived in fragments had become whole, not because she conquered her shame, but because she learned to hold it with compassion. And from that compassion, a different kind of beauty emerged. Quiet, rooted, and utterly her own. Months later, Naomi would revisit the same therapist's office, not for help, but for closure. The familiar scent of lavender, the soft hum of the diffuser, the low light, everything was the same, except her. Mara noticed it instantly. "You're breathing differently," she said. Naomi smiled. "I stopped waiting for a permission." They sat in silence, the kind that feels full, not awkward. Mara didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. Healing had rearranged Naomi's entire presence. The way her shoulders rested, the way her eyes met the room, the way her voice carried no tension between words. As they parted, Mara said quietly, "Remember, connection isn't something you find in others, it's something you return to within yourself." That line stayed with Naomi long after she left the office. It wasn't advice, it was an echo of what she had already begun to live. Outside, the evening was soft, painted in tones of amber and blue. Naomi walked slowly, feeling her feet on the ground, her breath unforced. The city noise no longer felt invasive. It sounded like rhythm, proof of life continuing around her. Later that night, she opened her journal for the last time. She wrote, "I used to think intimacy began with someone else's touch. Now I know it begins with listening, to breath, to heartbeat, to silence." She paused, fingers hovering over the page, and then added, "Pleasure was never the goal. Presence was. Pleasure just followed when I finally stopped running from myself." That sentence felt like a soft bridge, not only for her, but for anyone who might find her words one day and recognize their own story between the lines. Because her journey, like so many others, was never about the number of lovers or the absence of them. It was about learning that the body's first act of love is awareness, and its deepest act of devotion is consent. Naomi now saw intimacy as a spectrum of connection to self, to breath, to life itself. She understood that the body's language was not shame or need, but guidance, and that every small, conscious act, breathing before answering, touching with care, saying no when unready, was a way of rewriting her history, one cell at a time. Before closing the notebook, she wrote one final message, as if speaking to whoever might need it most. If you've ever mistaken performance for intimacy, stop punishing yourself. The body does not hold grudges. It only waits for your patience, for your permission, for your presence. Then she set the pen down, exhaled deeply, and smiled. The lamp glowed softly against the wall, painting a quiet halo around her. The journey that began with absence had become a homecoming. And as the night settled, Naomi whispered into the dark, not as confession, but as a promise. I am here, fully, finally. The screen fades to black. A pause, then the body always remembers the way back.